So silver and gold will not make you wealthy. Let me say it again. Silver and gold will not make you wealthy. Question is, what is wealth? So to me, in my opinion, wealth is what you have left over in terms of whatever you get paid with, be it dollars. If you have some dollars left over after you've paid for all of the things that you need to survive, your basic needs, that's your wealth. And you can do with that with what you choose. If you choose to go to the ballet or go canoeing or buy silver and gold or buy Bitcoin or spend it on a cruise, that's up to you. But if you want to maintain some of that wealth over time, you're going to have to either store it in dollars, which lose purchasing power over time. You've already heard my story about the woman that brought in 20 ounces of gold that her mother had given her, and she walked out with $50,000, but her mother only paid $4,800 for those two pieces of gold. Her mother could have just as easily given her the $4,800 in an envelope. She wouldn't have had near as much. So you don't want to save in dollars, you want to save in assets. Now, we sell gold and silver. We believe in them as an asset. I personally think everybody should own a little bit at least. Some people should own a lot more depending on their situation, but that's an individual choice. I just think everybody should own some. That's a bold statement, I know, but I really do believe everybody should own some. And I think if you could transplant my way of thinking about that inside of your head for a moment, you might feel the same. Just because I've done the work and I've gone through and analyzed it, doesn't make me smarter than you. It just means I've spent more time on it. And after you spend a certain amount of time on stuff, you start to see it differently, especially if you're looking and you're paying attention. So I personally am here to say that gold and silver cannot make you wealthy because you would have needed wealth. As I said, wealth was what's left over that you've worked for, work being the key component. Whatever you have left over from that, represented by dollars, is what you can transfer into some asset that will hold value over time. We're back to that again. That just words just never going to go away. So you would have to have wealth, meaning leftover labor, however that's expressed, however you're paid for your labor. You would have to have leftover labor in order to have some wealth. So for those of you that are getting beat up and pounded by inflation, whom I said I will address later on in a previous talk, just for example, probably can't help you because you don't have any wealth. You're running out of the things that you get paid in before the next time to have to pay for all your basic needs comes up. So you're falling behind. I can't necessarily help you until you help yourself by changing that situation, however that works its way out. We won't get into that too deep. And that's a sad situation, but it's something you and only you can change. That I will say on my critical side of talking to people about that. That's how I'm going to address it. Buck up, toughen up. It's the same for everybody in a sense that's in a similar boat. And even people you don't think are in that sort of financial stress they're just at a different level. So there's a lot of people being affected by it, some more than others. So gold and silver won't make you wealthy. You have to have wealth to have gold and silver. And the point of it then is to hold on to that wealth, to preserve it. Look, the only things you're ever going to get in life are things you work for. The foundation of all value in the world, in my opinion, is labor. Labor can be expressed as physical labor or an idea like mental labor. We all know thinking is hard, and thinking is where great ideas come from that we can use labor or other great ideas to build upon the foundation of. So they all have value. The idea of nuclear energy was conceived in the mind first and then physically brought into reality, and it has tremendous value. Many things were brought into reality that way. But labor is generally the only thing of value. You could say, but I've got gold in the ground on my property. Are you willing to dig it up? No? Okay, so there it sits. What worth does it have to anybody? Does gold in the ground and little microscopic amounts in the soil really change your life? No, it could be right in your backyard. It's not going to change your life until you take the labor to dig it up, make it into something. So make it into gold coins, make it into jewelry, whatever. So, and we value those things. We buy those things. Why? And well, that's individual perception. You have your own reasons that they have value, but the real true value in them is in the actual labor that went into them. Therefore, when you hear people talk about intrinsic value in gold and silver, that's why, because the labor is built in. Unlike a paper promise, say, to deliver an ounce of gold a year from now, um, is that gold even available yet? It's just a paper promise. It doesn't have any value of its own other than its potential value down the road. But until that is realized, the value is a delusion. And this is a large part of the problem that we face in our financial industry right now, because the majority of our foundation of our financial industry is built on this idea that paper promises have value. They have potential value, but they don't have value in real time, as gold and silver do, because the value is baked in. Same with any good that's produced. Like whoever built this computer that I'm talking to you on, it has tremendous value because a lot of labor went into the extraction of the minerals to make the glass and aluminum casing and all the components inside, and the silver and the circuit boards and whatever. All of that required labor to produce, so it has intrinsic value, as a useful tool to do what I'm doing right now. So back to the idea that buying precious metals can't make you wealthy. Now that probably seems like a slap in the face to some of you that are entering into the market thinking, well, I bought these as an investment to stay wealthy. Well, this comes back to my statement that I made to a friend of mine a few years back about he who loses the least wins. In my thesis going forward, we're losing productivity. They're even admitting now, our own economists in Canada are admitting we're losing productivity in Canada. Right. So how does that express itself? Well, it's probably going to express itself in a weird sort of value statement to do with measuring with dollars the real things. We're not measuring the real things. They'll say, well, productivity is measured in hours, but are every hour that we work equal? If somebody works an hour scrolling on their phone, 45 minutes of that hour, that's not very productive if they're supposed to be doing something productive with that time. So all hours measured are not necessarily equal. Some people get a lot more done in an hour than others. People are working on different types of projects that have different prices and therefore different value equations. So not all hours are should be measured equally. So because our productivity in Canada is measured in hours, this could also be a form of numerical delusion, because again, as I said, all hours are not created equal. So how should we measure these? Well, we should measure it in productive output of some sort of standard. An hour is kind of a standard if you're just doing nothing with the time. But if we're trying to produce something in that hour, that's the actual objective. The hour is not the objective. The hour is just another sort of loose way of measuring output. So we want to produce more widgets, more ideas, more downloads of software with our hours. And if we measure in that, we'll find out that that's going to give us a different perspective than measuring necessarily in hours. And I think what you're going to find is both of those might be going down. But that could also be a distortion in terms of how we're looking at what's available to the market. If there's more people purchasing certain things that are being produced, then if we're not measuring that properly, that creates a skewed perception as well. So again, back to the idea that we're only able to really retain as wealth what we're willing to work and put labor into. Yes, can you attain wealth by other means? Yes, but in my opinion, those other means are illegitimate, and they're part of the problem that we have is people are being unjustly enriched by certain practices that really should be not happening at all. I won't get into the details of them, but there's plenty of that going on out there in the world if you want to pay attention and look for it. So I believe unjust enrichment is a large part of the problem in how we measure things. And what we have to get to in our own life without worrying about everybody else, just everybody else is looking at your own situation, is realizing that the objective is to preserve the wealth that we've worked for. So labor being the general basis of everything, we transmit that labor into something we can hold on, because our own labor is great, but the fact that we don't produce everything for ourselves through our labor, we need to trade our labor for dollars so that we can trade those dollars for somebody else's labor expressed as the output that they produce, meaning bread or housing or a car or gasoline. So because we don't produce gasoline ourselves, we have to trade our labor for dollars and trade it for gasoline. We want that expression to be relatively consistent, but it's not right now. There's many distortions in the value equation. And right now we're seeing that in real time. We're literally sitting on top of a hyperinflation or pre-hyperinflationary scenario right now, because we have, in fact, if you go by the proper indices, been pushing more than 20% inflation, consumer inflation, for 3 years straight. And that is, by definition, the beginnings of hyperinflation. So unless we turn that scenario around, it will likely continue as other scenarios have in the past. So we have to protect ourselves by taking any labor that we have excess, which is our wealth, and moving that into something that will hold that relative value to other things over time. So if gold and bread, if it's 2,000 loaves of bread for an ounce of gold right now, and bread and gold tend to move the same in price, it could be $20,000 in gold for the same loaves of bread later. And you say, well, then why buy the gold? Well, that's another topic about risk mitigation. I'm going to address that in the next talk that I do. I'm going to talk about risk mitigation and being honest with yourself and putting all the risks on the table of each different asset that you may move into with your dollars, your labor expressed as dollars, to retain some of that over time, so that in a he who loses the least wins scenario, you lose less. And it's kind of our obligation to do so, because if we don't, then we're our own worst enemy. Nobody's going to come to help you with this. This is something that we all have to figure out on our own. There really is nobody out there other than guys like me trying to warn you, saying, hey, pay attention to this or you will suffer the consequences. So that's why I get on here and tell people, if you're coming in here thinking you're going to buy gold and silver and it's going to make you wealthy, probably not. But here's a caveat, and here's some really positive news on that. If that's kind of puts a damper on your whole idea of buying precious metals. Well, why don't I just hold on to my cash? Well, I've addressed that already, but that's a different story that typically has to play itself out over time for you to realize the error of that. The good news is that I do personally believe that gold and silver have been underpriced for a long, long time, and that I think in this next move, it's going to be very like, if you want to see what the next move in gold and silver are going to be like, I would say we're probably sitting at around somewhere around what we have going forward. We're about sitting at about 1976 right now. And that's just a few years before the massive gold bull that happened in 79 and 80. And I think we're going to see a repeat of that. So the good news is that from a speculative standpoint, we may actually see the price of gold go quite a bit higher. Now, what does for you is it takes the value that you had as labor expressed as dollars that was left over that you decide to put into gold, could now actually outpace other commodities, other things of value in the world, other assets, by outpacing them, growing faster, therefore creating a multi-x value comparative scenario to other assets, where at the critical point when you believe that gold or silver has reached a zenith, you can begin to divest yourself of that for other assets that can protect you going forward. Because this really, due to the financial system that we operate, this is kind of the nature of it. Typically, this process happens much slower, so we can adapt and adjust to it over time. It's a nuisance, but it doesn't really harm us in any drastic way in real time. That's changing now, so we can't ignore this anymore, because this will happen in multiples of what it would have happened in recent years. But it is a constant. Losing value is a constant. So he who loses the least wins. It's as simple as that. It's not what people want to hear. And to me, the economy shouldn't work this way, but it does. So if you're going to have to work to survive anyway, and you want to, make your situation as best as you possibly can, you're going to have to learn to count properly asset values, understand the nature of those markets, and make moves within those markets to defend yourself going forward. Nobody's coming to help you. You're going to have to do it on your own. And relying on experts and authorities in this, I think, is a big mistake. A lot of experts and authorities have their own way of thinking, which doesn't encompass the entire picture. They tend to deal in numbers all the time. Well, number bigger good. Well, number bigger good maybe, depending on what you compare it to. And this is the unfortunately the paradigm for a lot of people in the financial world. And this is why you get people that don't understand gold, think that people like me are lunatics for talking in these terms. But for those of you who get it and see it and study the history of these things as they've occurred in the past, like I just said, go back and look at the latter half of the 70s and into the early 80s. If you want, look at some charts, do some searches. It's all out there. And for yourself, just look at the movements and different things that have happened in the past. And these things generally do tend to repeat over time. The patterns tend to repeat because human beings don't change. We as a collective generally react the same way over time. So this is really about preserving wealth, and preserving wealth is every bit as important as gaining wealth. If you want to gain wealth, work harder, work smarter, work at something that produces more, work at something that more people want and are willing to pay more for. Those are the paths to wealth. Any other path to wealth is really just theft, in my opinion, or some sort of covert type of theft. We won't get into that now, but I do believe that a lot of our financial system is just predatory, and it's kind of a form of theft juggling, and we call it other things, but that's really what it is, unfortunately. So if you don't want to have your life savings and your energy that you've put out there in terms of work stolen from you over time, you're going to have to get wiser and pay more attention and learn to count different. All right, that's all I have to say on that. And as I always say, have a great day.